Hi family, it's Tasha MAMABEAR Prepping. You already know what time it is. Get your drink, pull up. I've got mine, baby. We're about to get into it. This video is for a subscriber who mentioned that she needed help in the comments of a video, and then also followed that up with an email. And she had just the same basic questions that a lot of new preppers have when it comes to preserving food in Mylar bags. So we're going to talk specifically today about Mylar bags, oxygen absorbers, when to use them, when not to use them, and basically the food that can go into it. All of those questions are things that she had, right? What size oxygen absorbers, when do you use them, when do you not, what Mylar bags, all this stuff. Okay, so let's talk about Mylar bags first. Mylar bags come in all different sizes, right? 5 really large ones, 5-gallon, bags. They have 1-gallon bags. That's probably my go-to for a lot of stuff, is the 1-gallon bag. And all the way down to like tiny little bags, right? The important thing to think about is a couple things, right? There's different Mylar bags that you can get. You want to ensure that you're getting a 5 mil at least. The thickness does matter, right? The thicker that is, less critters can get through, chew through. The darker it is, just the obviously higher quality. The thicker it is, the higher quality it is, okay? But at least 5 mil is what you need to shoot for. I've never seen any below that, so I actually didn't know that was a thing when I first started doing it, okay? Let's see, different sizes, different closures, right? Some of them are just flat open, and then some of them have the actual reseal, right? The plastic reseal, so that once you open it, you can then have a food in there that you're taking food out of, and you're resealing it. Those again are my favorite, because when you do go to pop that bag, it's important to be able to maintain the quality of the food in there for as long as possible in your working pantry, right? So I like the resealable kind. Not necessary though for preserving food, all right? Labels, must have labels, gotta label it. Normally, if it's something that I know I need to know a measurement for, I'll write that on the front. So what's a popular one that like potato flakes, anything that I know I need to add a certain amount of water to or whatever, I'll write that. I'll always write how many cups something is in there, and then I'll write the conversion of what it's supposed to, what you're supposed to add to it to make it, right? And I'll write that right on the outside label. Like sugar, all that stuff, just label it. Label the day, what it is, the day that you put it in there, and then, hey, this is 18 cups of sugar in this bag, whatever, okay? Let's see what else I had for Mylar bag notes. Different openings, different sizes, closures are different, labeling, 5 mil. And double layers. When I'm doing my Mylar, I'm not doing Mylar and then you just have that on the shelf somewhere. You always want to double protect your Mylar bags, right? The ideal of the Mylar bag is to have food kept in a dark, cool place, right? And that Mylar bag keeps sunlight out. It helps you with those elements. However, you still need to keep it in a dry, cool place. And I keep it doubled up, right? Meaning I use 5-gallon buckets a lot, even if I'm not using the 5-gallon Mylar bag. Let's talk about this too. So a lot of people have a lot of discussion of like, don't use those big bags. That doesn't make sense when you go to pop it and now you have all that rice you have to use and it's open to the elements, all this stuff. The main things that I use the 5-gallon Mylar bags for is rice and beans. And these are my forever foods that I am preserving in a 5-gallon bucket, or 5-gallon Mylar. I am sealing up with an oxygen absorber. I'm putting it in a 5-gallon bucket, and then I'm sealing it. And my intent for that food is to never touch it again. That's to touch in 20 years from now, 30 years from now, or true emergency food, long-term storage. Everything else, for the most part, my go-to is a 1-gallon Mylar bag. Unless I'm doing just smaller type things, that I know I don't want to have go bad or will go bad quickly once I pop the bag, I might choose a smaller bag. But my go-to is the 1-gallon. And then my doubling up is I'll do a bunch of bags, and then I'll fill a tote, let's say, with all sugar, all bags of 1-gallon bags of sugar. I'll fill another tote with 1-gallon bags of flour, right? And I'll do it like that. Or I'll do that with buckets. I'll do some vac sealing, or I'll do some Mylar Mylar bags, and I'll just throw it all in a 5-gallon bucket, close it up, say what it is. I have buckets that are just baking stuff, right? I have 5-gallon buckets where I've Mylar bagged, you know, various baking components, and those are in the same bucket together, and it just says baking goods or baking, right? So you can do this a few different ways is what I'm saying. There is no, you have to do this, don't do that. You can do what you feel is necessary, okay? But double layers, because you want that for that extra darkness, coolness, to keep critters out is the main thing, right? That's another barrier that they have to get through to get to your food. Okay, so very important. Do not leave Mylar bags filled with food just on your shelf somewhere in your pantry, in your long-term storage, whatever the case may be, okay? Now let's talk about food. She had a lot of questions about which types of foods you could put in Mylar bags, right? And was there foods that you could not put in Mylar bags? Okay, Mylar bags is really for preserving anything that is dry, okay? Dry food, so sugar, salt, rice, beans, flour, oatmeal, instant coffee, what else? You know, baking soda, baking powder. She asked specifically about cornmeal, cornstarch, potato flakes. All of those things, girl, can be put into a Mylar bag. The question now would be, do you need an oxygen absorber for it or do you not? Now, I found that when I was first doing this, I'm just keeping it 100. The easiest way for me to do this was just to Google. I literally was using Google, and I wasn't just taking people's word, right? I wasn't Googling and just taking like a YouTuber's word for it or a video. I was looking for bona fide educational pieces, right? USDA, you know, real websites, and their answer to that, right? When I was trying to figure out oxygen absorbers, what food you could use those in and not, all of those questions, I was just going to the internet individually for them because I didn't want to mess up, and it's very overwhelming, right? It's very overwhelming to be like, which food you could do this food. So overall, you know, the thought process is if it's dry, you can store it, right, in a Mylar bag. Now, certain things that do not need an oxygen absorber. Salts, sugars, those don't need oxygen absorbers because if you incorporate that, it's going to make those things become a brick, right? It takes all the moisture out of there and that stuff just bricks up and it's not cool. Baking soda, baking powder, not required. Anything, the basic thing about oxygen absorbers, I guess a tip or a basic rule would be, is it has too high of an oil content, the food product, or it just has too much moisture in general, okay? Certain foods will last forever, but there's a lot of foods that have too much oil in them. You may hear people say, this is one. You have a lot of people are like preserve in Mylar bags different rices, jasmine rice, brown rices, mixed, you know, wild rices, things like that. Now, can you put rice or a product like that has an oil content, let's say nuts, a lot of people do it with nuts too, in a Mylar bag, right? With an oxygen absorber if you want, whatever. People have done that for short-term storage, right? This is for quick turnaround, your working pantry. This is not your 25-year food. That stuff is going to go rancid. It is not going to last. If the food has too high of an oil content, it's not going to last. So people who put, like, let's say brown rice up, they're like, oh, well, I like brown rice, I don't like white rice. Well, that rice though is not going to last forever. Brown rice does not last forever because it has too high of an oil content in it, okay? So there's certain foods, if the oil content is too high or high in moisture, it's not going to work. That little oxygen absorber, first of all, is going to be working its little heart out and then not be able to get all the air out of there, okay? Because the food is too wet, it has too much moisture in it, okay? or it's got too much oil and it's just not gonna dry out, and the air, it's not gonna be able to do its job, and that food is gonna go rancid. So when I say don't just believe a YouTuber, even me, you guys, I'm doing this to help somebody, but you should be researching yourself. You should be getting your books on food preservation yourself and learning this stuff yourself, okay? People do things a little different, right? And for you as a new prepper to be deciphering what you should do and what you should not do needs to come from you, from doing your own research. When I was first learning, I was trying not to listen to other YouTubers, right? I was trying to go to the actual educational sources for the information, and not just taking the word of somebody who had been doing it for a while, right? Let's talk about other no-go foods for Mylars. Brown rice, we talked about. Some other examples would be raisins, nuts, granola, cookies, crackers, animal foods. Now, some of that stuff I preserve, but I preserve it in jars. Like crackers, I preserve in jars. Candy, crackers, even nuts. Nuts. I don't try to keep a lot of nuts on hand because I know that they will not last forever. But let's say you get a big box, a couple big boxes somehow. You buy a couple or whatever and you want to preserve them. You can put them in a Mylar bag, cut them open, slice them open, put them in a Mylar bag, and put an oxygen absorber in there just to make them last a little bit longer. But in the reality of it is, if you don't eat that stuff and now it's wasted, it's gonna go rancid, you're gonna be unhappy, and it's just good to start fresh and know the rules from the beginning of the stuff that will last. Get your big grains, get your foods that are forever foods. I've done a couple videos on forever foods. I'll try to link them, and these are foods that ideally will last forever if you keep them right, meaning they don't get wet. You put them in a Mylar bag or you vac seal them and you have an oxygen absorber. You should be good to go. Let's talk about, what else did she ask? We're going to talk about vac sealing a little bit in a minute. She asked specifically, all the stuff you asked me about, she asked specifically about salt, flour, pancake mix, cornmeal, potato flakes. All of that stuff you can put in a Mylar bag. Everything you mentioned you can do in a Mylar bag, but some of those things you will not put the oxygen absorber in. So specifically the stuff you mentioned, I think you mentioned baking powder. You're not going to put your oxygen absorber in that. And your cornstarch, you don't need it in your cornstarch. And any kind of salt, sugars. She asked about cake mix. So here's the thing about cake mix, you guys. It's better to preserve cake mixes and all these different baking type things that everything's already put together for you in one package. I know a lot of people that open those up, vac seal those, or put them in a Mylar bag and keep them. I think that the best thing to do is just to vac seal those or put them in a jar and vac seal it all. But in theory, it's not going to last forever because of the components that are in it. So as long as you remember that, to me, it's best to just take the components that you would need to make a cake, and preserve those individually, right? You're preserving the flour individually, the sugar individually, maybe the cocoa individually, the powdered egg individually. You have all the pieces of the cake separately for baking later, right? But is it possible? Yeah, you can but I would be vac sealing that stuff. I wouldn't probably be I've never put cake mixes or muffin mix or anything like that in a Mylar bag with an oxygen absorber. I vac sealed that stuff just to prolong its natural life, right? Past expiration, the best that I can, right? To extend that pantry time, right? For that said thing. But I've never put, cake mix away for long term. I've put the components away to be able to make that stuff later. Okay, if that makes sense. Let's talk about vac sealing and Mylar. I'm a fan of Mylar, right? It's the easiest because you're literally putting the food in the bag. You figure out what you're gonna do, get your oxygen absorbers, put them in the bag, seal them up. let's talk about some tips. You have different sizes of the oxygen absorbers. Again, you can go to the website, the web, and figure out what size is needed for what bag that you have. Typically, if you have a 1 gallon bag, a 300 or 400 is going to be fine, right? Those average 200 or 300s that you have, any of those sizes are going to be fine. Jars anywhere from a 100 to 400, those are fine. They're going to do their job, and you're going to be fine. If you're doing a 5 gallon, in my 5 gallon bags, I do a 2000 cc, but again, you're going to look it up. It's pretty easy, okay? One thing to remember though is when you have your oxygen absorbers open, the minute you open that pack that says maybe has 10 of them, they're working right away, okay? And so you do not pop that until you're ready to put them in the bags. 2, you want to seal the bags almost all the way closed, right? And then count out how many bags you have, is typically what I do, so that I can grab that amount quickly. I seal the whatever's left back up, and typically I reseal in a glass jar, and then I pop them in each one and close them up, okay? Everybody has their way of doing it. That's my way of doing it, okay? Basically, the thought is you just want to use them as quickly as possible because those bad boys are working the minute that they're opened. If you do not open them, it said like 6 months to a year, just because eventually over time air gets up in there. They're working within their packet, right? They're vac sealed though, but again, over time, 6 months to a year, that breaks down, the plastic breaks down, maybe the seal, it loses its seal, whatever, and the components that are within it just break down, or are not going to be as strong and work and be as potent, okay? Oxygen absorbers take about 2 to 4 hours. So a lot of people, they'll put them in the bag, Mylar bag, they'll close it, and then they'll leave it out like on the counter or in the tote open. They don't put it away to make sure that it works. So you should be able to see within 2 to 4 hours a difference in your Mylar bag as far as air being pulled from it, okay? It's shrinking up. If you don't see that and you can clearly feel some sort of air, there's a possibility that you had a dud, and that oxygen absorber is not going to do what it needs to do. And then you can make the decision to pop the bag, put another one in, and then reseal. That's what's kind of cool about Mylar bags too. You might have to dump out some of the food, right, to get the level down lower, but you can reseal. All right, vac sealing. I'm not a huge fan of vac sealing machines. I am for vac sealing meat and food that you're going to put in your freezer. A huge fan of that. Not a huge fan of vac sealers in general, in my opinion. A lot of them do not last, and they end up just breaking and just not working one day, right? I've spent quite a bit of money on different vac sealers. 2, sometimes the jar holder and the vac seal machine, I don't know what it is, but sometimes those just don't work that well. And sometimes it takes a very long time to seal a jar, right? Which is very annoying to me. I'm a little impatient when it comes to sealing jars. You can get a brake bleeder. What's her name? Rain Country. She uses that. Like that's her go-to. She doesn't use a vac sealer machine. She uses a hand pump that's a brake bleeder to seal all her jars, okay? That's awesome. That's an awesome option. Obviously for grid down, you should have that as a backup. But vac sealing I'm not a huge fan of, because you vac seal and then if you lose the seal, right, it didn't seal right, and, you know, I hate, especially, this is the thing that really upsets me, is vac sealing MREs. I'll vac seal MREs, I'll go back and there'll be like a handful of them that have lost the seal and they're not sealed anymore, right? And so I'm not a huge fan of it. I am a fan of Mylar bags, putting food in there, closing it up. I am a huge fan of vac sealing jars. Even putting food in a jar, like crackers, chips, that type of thing, and then putting an oxygen absorber in the jar and then closing it up, candy, whatever, and then closing it up. I like to do our snacks. Basically, I do all our snacky food that way. I do a lot of baking goods. in that way, right? My working baking pantry is all jars, and then I have bigger size jars for the little bit longer term storage, and so on and so on, right? And the ones that can have oxygen absorbers, do have oxygen absorbers. Some people will suck the air out. We'll put the oxygen absorber in there and then suck the air out, so that if the seal breaks at some point, but to me, a glass with a lid, that's airtight, baby. So put your food in there, put your oxygen absorber in there, close up the jar. It's going to do its job and take out the air. I also do a lot of rice and beans that way, and I also do, I just said baking goods. So baking goods, snacks, rice, beans, that type of stuff I love doing in jars. I like jars anyway when you're talking about preserving food. It is a go-to item. That's why I'm real big on keeping all your jars from your commercially type foods that you bought, your pickles, your spaghetti sauces, your olive jars, whatever jars that you had food in. Don't throw those away, because those are golden. You can take that spaghetti jar, put crackers, clean it out, obviously, put crackers in it, put an oxygen absorber in it, and close the lid. That right there, keeping your crackers that way, will make your crackers last way longer than they will when you just keep them in the box on the shelf. I don't know if you've noticed, chips, crackers, that type of thing, they go bad quickly, right? And if you don't eat them, right, maybe you don't feel like eating chips, but if you kept them in that jar with oxygen absorber, baby, it's going to keep them fresh way longer. Now, can you do that for long-term storage? Nah, there's just too much oil and different things in chips that are just, they're not conducive. They're going to go rancid. But for your working pantry and just being smart and trying to make food last longer than normal, that's a good tip, okay? Let me take a look at my notes and just see if there was anything else, you guys, that I wanted to mention. I'm sure you guys have been going, we'll go crazy in the comments and be adding your 2 cents as far as your tips, your tricks, things that you like to do. This is one we're going to hear, and I'm just going to discuss this so you guys know my stance. So a lot of people stand by that you must freeze your rice and beans and different things. You must freeze that stuff before you preserve it. I'm just going to keep it 100. I don't believe in that method, and I've never ever had any issues with my long-term storage or anything that I've popped open and used or checked, okay? I do not believe, I feel like there is a bigger, and again, this is my opinion, okay? There is a bigger chance when you freeze it for there to be condensation. So what happens is people freeze it to kill the bugs. They lay it out on a sheet pan or whatever, dry it out, and then you preserve it. I do not like that, because there's so much room for error for you to have frozen it and then you don't dry it out enough before you preserve it. It's another step. To me, it's unnecessary, because when you're preserving it and you're putting oxygen absorbers in there, that is taking out the air, which is then suffocating bugs, and they cannot live through that, okay? They're not going to live in a Mylar bag that you've put oxygen absorbers in, okay? Either way, they're still going to be there, okay? Whether you froze it first or not, you're still going to have dead weebles or whatever in there, and you're going to have to deal with that. What else is another thing that people always say? There was one other thing that's a difference that people do. I can't think of it right now, you guys, but you're going to see people mentioning that. You're going to mention people, you better freeze it. I've never had an issue. I could see possibly some people keep, a lot of homesteads keep their rice, for example, in just a big tote, right? A big bucket. And they do not put oxygen absorber in there. They don't put it in an extra Mylar bag. They just put it straight in the tote. They put some bay leaves in there, and they close it up, and then it's a huge tote. It's a working tote that they can go in and go out of, and you know, a lot of them speak to that and say they've never had an issue ever. I could see maybe freezing at first if you're going to be doing that, but again, there's a lot of people that will not dry that out all the way, and now you risk having moisture in your rice, which was the whole point of this, was to ensure that you have a dry product that you're putting into a dry bag with the oxygen absorber, taking out all the air, and then preserving said food for as long as it possibly can be kept for. Okay. I'll try, like I said before, the video on forever food, so you can see I did a video probably was my second video ever, you guys. It was 30 foods that are forever foods, and it has a blooper on the end where the video just keeps going for like 18 more minutes, you guys. The video is not as long as it says it is. I'll link that, and then I'll link another one. I think I did it again, but I didn't do 30 foods. I think I did much less, right? But there is a lot of foods that if you preserve it this way, Mylar bags, oxygen absorbers, or no oxygen absorbers, that food will last forever. And that's the type of foods that I like to store for long term. Okay. You want to keep that in mind when you're doing these bags and picking your sizes on your long-term stuff, meaning stuff you're planning to preserve and not touch for 2 decades from now, or is it stuff that you plan on using and rotating in a year, in 2 years, and 3 years, right? It's part of a shorter time frame of using. Okay, so I hope this was helpful. I'm sure that we're all going to learn a lot from the comments. I always learn something from every single video, so let me know in the comments below what your thoughts were on this video. Did you learn something? Hopefully I answered your subscriber girl. I hope I answered your questions. And get to preserving, you guys. Like, get this food, because the longer you wait, the more expensive it's going to be. And a lot of these dry foods are not overly expensive, right? Pasta, for example, is not overly expensive. You can get that and save it. You could let's talk about that. Foods that puncture, you got to be careful with certain foods. Oh, that's something she asked. She asked, do you keep stuff in the original package, or do you just pour it in? Me, most of the time, I just pour it right into the Mylar bag. Some stuff you could. Typically, the stuff that I keep in original bags tend to be stuff that I vac seal, like if it's muffins, or if it's crackers, or if it's some kind of snacky stuff, I'll snip it and then I'll vac seal it. That's typically the only time I'm keeping the original packaging. In Mylar bags, normally I'm just taking it out. If it's oatmeal, if it's coffee, flour, sugar, I'm pouring it out of the bag, original bag, then I'm pouring it into the Mylar bag. So I suppose it's another barrier. And so you literally could just, especially with smaller bags, you could do that. Just make sure that you're snipping it open, okay, so that your oxygen absorber can get to the air and suck out the air that's actually in the packaged food, right? If you don't snip the food open a little bit, there's air that's in the packaging with the food right now. And so if you don't snip it, the oxygen absorber won't get that air. It will just get all the air around the packaging, and then your food will still go bad because you had air in the original packaging. Okay, so make sure you snip the original packaging open, or the top completely off, if you're gonna do that. Okay. I will see you guys on Monday for the premiere. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do. I think it might be centered around water, my video on Monday. I hope you guys have a blessed weekend, get a lot of things done, spend some time with your family. We're going on a big hike tomorrow, so excited about that. Get out of the house. And I'll see you guys tomorrow or Monday. Take care. Bye.